Han Seok is the boss. He gives orders, and they obey. But one day, bartender Kang Mi-soo said, "No." This refusal became the spark. Now he's obsessed. He learns everything about her life and secretly rescues her from the problems he himself created. She's forced to enter his world by his own rules, but soon realizes she's been used. When Han Seok's enemies kidnap Mi-soo to break him, he drops everything to save her, and she makes him an unexpected offer, not to run away, but to rule this darkness together, as equals. This is the story of how refusal became the beginning of a union stronger than power. She rejected him as a man, but agreed to become his queen. Han Seok signed saw the man's death warrant. He did it in his office, with one short sentence into the phone. Then there was silence. He went down to his bar in the basement of the same building. This was his domain, and they feared him here. "Leave the bottle and go," he said to the bartender. The bartender silently put down the whiskey and disappeared. Han Seok drank quickly, without relish. The alcohol quenched the chill within him. By the third shot, the emptiness had given way to arrogance. He felt in control again, strong, invulnerable. His gaze fell on the counter. A new girl was working there. She was wiping glasses, collected and calm. He didn't remember her face. He caught her eye and beckoned. The girl approached, slowly. "Yes?" she asked evenly. "What's your name?" "Kang Mi-soo." "Your shift is ending," Han Seok said, looking down at her. "Come with me, upstairs." He wasn't asking. He was stating. His voice carried this confidence of a man who never hears no. Mi-soo looked at him, directly, without fear. "No," she answered clearly. Then she turned and returned behind the bar, as if she had simply refused him an extra drink. Han Seok froze. He didn't immediately understand. He slowly placed his shot glass on the table. For the first time in years, he'd been told no, straight to his face. And it was a simple bartender. Instead of anger, something else flared within him, a keen, lively interest, mingled with a blow to his ego. He watched her continue working, completely unperturbed. He finished his whiskey. Now the tension from the difficult decision was replaced by a new concrete thought. He rose from the sofa and walked out without looking back. The game has begun. An hour later, the bar was almost empty. Han Seok was still sitting at his table, watching Mi-soo. Her calm confidence seemed to challenge him. When the last customers had left, he called her over again. This time, he stood up and walked right up to the counter. He was close, invading her personal space. "You don't understand," he said quietly, his voice no longer holding the same confidence, but instead a cold curiosity. "I didn't ask. I offered what others consider an honor." Mi-soo didn't back down. She looked him straight in the eyes, placing the rag on the counter. "I understand. And my answer is no. I don't need your honor. My shift is over. I need to close the bar." Her voice was quiet, but every word rang out clearly, like steel striking glass. No fear, no anger, just a fact. Han Seok leaned even closer, his breath smelling like expensive whiskey. "Do you know who I am?" "You're the owner of this place," Mi-soo replied without blinking. "And I'm the bartender. That's all. If you don't have an order, I have to work." She turned around and began turning off the light behind the counter, pointedly ignoring his presence. At that moment, something in Han Seok snapped. Not rage, not the thirst for immediate punishment. It was deeper. His absolute power, his unquestionable will, had just collided with a silent, unyielding wall, and lost. He straightened slowly, an uncontrollable spark flaring in his gaze, glassy from alcohol and the blow to his ego. "Okay," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "Okay." He turned and walked out without looking back. The door closed quietly behind him. Mi-soo sighed only when the heavy door slammed behind him. Her hands trembled slightly, but she clenched them into fists. She knew she'd just gotten herself into serious trouble, but her self-esteem proved stronger than her fear. And Han Seok, climbing up to his penthouse, was already making plans. His thoughts, sharp and clear despite the alcohol, revolved around one name, Kang Mi-soo. Her no rang out louder in his head than any yes he'd ever heard, and this no had to be made to disappear, at any cost. An obsession, cold and methodical, took root within him. The next morning, barely clearing his head from yesterday, Han Seok called his right-hand man, Chang Min, to him. "Find out everything you can about the barmaid from the basement bar, Kang Mi-soo. Everything," he ordered, looking out the window at the waking city. There was no passion in his voice, only a steely determination. "Problem, sir?" Chang Ming asked cautiously. "No. Interest," Han Seok said curtly. "She told me no." Chang Ming froze almost imperceptibly. This was news. He nodded and left. Information trickled in throughout the day. The profile turned out to be thin. Kang Mi-soo, 24 years old, a university student in the evening program, majoring in finance, worked several jobs to pay for her studies and support her younger sister. sister, lives in a modest neighborhood. Loans, no connections, no patrons, just a hard worker. The more Han-seok read, the more his confusion, mixed with irritation, grew. She had nothing, no defense. And yet, she dared. That evening, he went down to the bar again, this time, sober. He took the same table and watched. Misu worked, efficiently, professionally, and detachedly. She smiled at the customers, but there was a slight weariness in her eyes. As she passed by to collect the empty glasses, he stopped her with a word. Kang Misu. She turned around, recognizing him. There was neither fear nor greeting in her gaze, only anticipation. I want to apologize for yesterday, he said evenly. It was a lie, but it was said convincingly. I wasn't myself. Let me offer you a drink as compensation. No need to apologize, she replied, not moving from her spot. And I don't drink while I'm working. If you don't order anything, I have to work. She turned away again, and again it was a no. Quiet, polite, and therefore even more unbearable. At that moment, everything inside him turned upside down. Rational arguments that she was simply stupid or didn't understand her situation collapsed. She understood, and yet she refused. Her independence, her calm dignity, became an open challenge to his authority. He left the bar without another word. In the elevator, looking at his reflection in the polished steel, he became acutely aware of a new feeling. It wasn't just anger or possessiveness. It was obsession. He had to break down this wall, prove to her, and most of all, to himself, that his yes was inevitable. He took out his phone and dialed Changmin. Keep watching, and start with gifts, flowers, expensive ones, every day. Have them come to her home and work. Sir, if she refuses, she will refuse, Han-seok interrupted confidently. That's not important. What's important in that she constantly thinks of me. Go ahead. The first roses arrived the next morning, at her school address, expensive, black, with a short, unsigned card. They were thrown into the nearest trash can. The second bouquet, white orchids, was delivered by a courier right to the bar during her shift. She politely declined, asking them to return it to the sender. The rejections only added fuel to the fire. Han-seok received the reports and felt a strange satisfaction. She resisted, as expected. It made the game harder, and the goal more desirable. He changed tactics. Instead of flowers, he began offering random donations. Her sister, who worked part-time at a cafe, was unexpectedly fired over a bogus complaint. 2 hours later, she was offered a new position at a prestigious restaurant with triple the salary. Misu immediately realized who was behind it. She turned down the offer for her sister. Then the problems with the landlord disappeared, suddenly stopping demanding higher rent. The bank loan issues also suddenly resolved themselves. Each of these miracles was a carefully planned move, a demonstration of his omniscience and power. He wasn't just giving gifts, he was changing the circumstances of her life, squeezing them into his terms. One evening, as she was walking home from school, a black sedan slowly pulled up alongside her. The window was rolled down. Han-seok was sitting in the back seat. Get in. I'll give you a ride, he said. It wasn't an offer. I don't have far to go, and I prefer to walk, Misu replied without stopping. You always refuse. Why? She finally stopped and looked at him. Her eyes blazed not with anger, but with tired contempt. Because these aren't gifts. They're a noose. A gradual and expensive one. I don't want to be indebted, especially to you. The window rolled up, and the car smoothly pulled away, leaving her alone on the deserted street. At that moment, Han-seok realized that simple handouts wouldn't win her over. He needed a serious trump card, an event that would break her defenses, not from the outside, but from the inside, a situation where her pride would collide with harsh necessity, and she would be forced to accept his hand. He gave Changming a new order: find her weakest spot. Not a mundane problem, something real, a threat. A problem she can't solve on her own, and let me know. We'll provide a solution. The game of cat and mouse was over. The real hunt had begun. Changmin reported 3 days later. A problem had been discovered, more serious than even Han-seok had expected. Misu was in debt, not from a bank. Her late father had borrowed money from a local loan shark, a man with shady connections. The sum had grown unmanageable over the years. The loan shark, Kim, began threatening not only with confiscation of her last possessions, but also with reprisals against her younger sister if the money wasn't received within a month. Misu hid the debt by working 3 jobs, but her desperate attempts were a drop in the ocean. Han-seok listened without interrupting. A cold, satisfied glimmer lit his eyes. This was perfect. A real danger, and only he could eliminate it. Invite Mr. Kim for a chat today, he ordered. The conversation was brief. The loan shark, pompous and brazen in his neighborhood, turned pale within 5 minutes of entering the office. He was politely but firmly informed that his claims against Kang Misu were canceled. Forever. All promissory notes would be delivered here. As compensation for the inconvenience, he was offered a lucrative deal in another neighborhood. He couldn't refuse. The next day, Misu came home from her night shift to find a thick brown envelope in her mailbox. Inside were all of her father's receipts, neatly tied with ribbon, and a blank business card. It was embossed with only a name, Han Suk, and a phone number. She sat for a long time on the steps of the squalid building, leafing through familiar, hated papers. The feeling was strange, immense relief mixed with a chilling horror. Her problems hadn't disappeared. They'd simply been taken over by someone else, someone far more terrifying. The phone in her hand vibrated. An unknown number. She picked it up. "Did you get my message?" came a calm, recognizable voice. "What do you need?" she asked, and her voice trembled. "A conversation. A civilized one. You owe me, Kang Misu. Let's discuss the terms of repayment of this debt tomorrow, in a neutral place. I'll send a car." He hung up. Misu stared at the ashes of the IOUs burned in the sink. She had no choice. He had calculated it. His rescue was a trap she had to walk into voluntarily, out of love for her sister. It wasn't a gift. It was a deal. And he held all the cards. The next morning, a black sedan was waiting for her at her house. The driver silently opened the door. Misu got in, feeling the trap slamming shut. The car took her not to an office or a bar, but to a quiet, upscale restaurant with private rooms. It was already guarded by two impassive men in dark suits. Han Seok was waiting for her at the table. He was sober, impeccably dressed, and looked at her appraisingly, without his previous drunken arrogance. "Sit down," he said. "I'm glad you came." "Did I have a choice?" Misu snapped, remaining standing. "There's always a choice," he retorted. "You could have abandoned your sister in the city and tried to hide, or you could have gone to the police with a story about how a mafia boss paid your debt. But we both know how that would end. So yes, your choice was wise." She sat down, clasping her hands in her lap. "What do you want? Pay off the debt." "I don't have that kind of money, I know. That's why I'm offering an alternative. A job." Misu raised an eyebrow skeptically. "A barmaid at your other establishment? No thank you." "Not a barmaid," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You have a background in finance. I have assets that require proper accounting. Legal at first glance. I'm offering you a position, an official one, with a good salary. You'll work, and part of your income will go toward the debt. In a few years, you'll be clean. Everything is above board." It was a clever move. He wasn't offering favor, but a contract, a business proposition she, with her pride, could accept without feeling bought. "And the terms?" she asked, already realizing the catch. "You work for me. You carry out assignments. You maintain confidentiality. And we meet occasionally to discuss business. Like now." He gave her the illusion of control. She would be his employee, not his plaything. But they both knew this was only the first step. He was drawing her into his world, giving her a justification. Work, duty, necessity. Misu was silent for a long time, staring at the table. To refuse would be to issue another challenge she lacked the strength to face. To accept would be to acknowledge his authority and enter his game on his terms. "I want a written contract," she finally said, looking him in the eye, "with all the obligations and a repayment plan." "Of course, and our meetings are business only, on neutral territory." "As you wish," he smiled. It wasn't a victory in his eyes, but the first frontier captured. She'd agreed. She'd entered his system. Everything else, he was sure, was a matter of time and patience. Misu signed the contract an hour later. The document was legal, the terms clear, but as she signed, she felt she was signing something more. She had entered into a deal with the shadow, and the price of freedom was still unknown. The contract began the next day. Misu stopped working as a bartender. She was given a small but stylish office in one of Han Seok's legitimate office buildings. Her job was accounting and reporting for several seemingly respectable businesses, a coffee shop chain, a laundromat, and a transportation company. The numbers added up. The work was challenging, but honest on paper. Han Seok kept his distance. He showed up once a week for a short, business-like conversation. He asked about work and gave instructions. There was never a hint of personal involvement. He acted like a strict but fair boss. This confused Misu. She expected a trick, pressure, but there was none. One evening, while she was lingering over her quarterly report, he walked in without knocking, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "You're working late," he stated, placing a glass in front of her. "The report is due tomorrow," she replied dryly, without looking up from the screen. "I know. That's why I came." He sat down opposite her and took off his jacket. For the first time, she saw him not as a monument to power, but as a tired man. His fatigue was evident beneath his perfect suit. He sipped his coffee and winced. "Cold. Like everything today. Have you had a hard day?" she asked involuntarily, then regretted it. He looked at her, directly. without cover. I fired a man today, not for mistakes, for greed. He risked the business of many people. There was no pride in his voice, only hard, cold determination. And that worries you, she said. It was not a question. It's a necessity, like your contract. Sometimes there is nothing else to choose from. He stood up, leaving his coffee unfinished. Don't stay up too late. You have a lecture tomorrow at 9, he reminded her as he left. This moment of vulnerability, tiny and sincere, became the first crack in the wall between them. Misu stared at the closed door. He knew her schedule. He cared for her in a strange, controlling way. And this short conversation showed that his world wasn't just money and power. It was a constant choice between bad and worse. The following week, an incident occurred. One of the transport company's couriers was involved in an accident. The cargo, expensive electronics, was stolen. The insurance company refused to pay. This was a blow to the reputation and finances of a small but important company. Misu, while studying the documents, came across a discrepancy in the itinerary. She brought the discovery to Han Seok. He listened and asked a few pointed questions. It was a setup, he concluded quietly, looking at the papers. Competitors, thank you. You just saved me a large sum of money and more. He didn't praise her. He gave her a new, challenging task, to deal with the insurance company independently, using only documents and the law. She did it. 3 days later, the insurance company paid the claim. When she brought the confirmation, Han Seok smiled for the first time. Not smugly, but with genuine, warm respect. You turned out to be smarter than I thought, Kang Misu. I was just doing my job. No, you did more. You think like a strategist. In this world, that's more valuable than brute force. At that moment, something shifted between them. Hostility gave way to cautious, mutual interest. He saw her not as an object of desire, but as potential. She saw him not only as a monster, but also as a leader bearing a heavy burden. The seeds of emotion, dark and complex, fell into the fertile soil of forced intimacy and began to sprout. They weren't yet love. They were a recognition of equal strength in another. Chong Min, Han Seok's right-hand man, noticed the change. He saw his boss spending more time in the office, his gaze losing its icy edge when looking at that girl's reports. For Chang Min, this wasn't romance, but vulnerability, a dangerous weakness. He began to act cautiously. First, through hints in conversations with other lower-level officials. The boss has been hanging out with the new accountant a lot. Rumors began to spread. Then Chang Min orchestrated an accidental leak about Misu being the one who had uncovered the fake accident. This sparked interest among rivals and disgruntled elements within the clan. A girl who could influence Han Seok's decisions and thought outside the box became the perfect target. Misu's first warning sign was a call to her personal number. An unfamiliar voice, polite and cold, offered to discuss the terms of cooperation without going through her superiors. She hung up and went straight to Han Seok. They called me. They offered to poach me, she reported clearly, without emotion. He looked up at her. A flash of concern flashed in his eyes. Not concern, but an instant, predatory assessment of the threat. Describe the voice. What exactly did they say? She repeated verbatim. Han Seok nodded, already dialing the number on his phone. It was Park, he stated, putting the phone down. My partner in some matters. He sensed an opportunity, so the rumor mill is already working. He walked to the window, looking out at the city. Now you're in danger. They'll try to get to me through you. Blackmail, bribery, or they'll simply eliminate you to weaken me. What should I do? She asked. And her voice didn't waver. He turned around. He looked at her for a long time. Officially, you're my employee. That status is no longer enough to protect you. And it's not enough for them to leave you alone. He paused, choosing his words. We need to change the terms. They've already crossed business boundaries. You either leave completely or get closer. Part of an inner circle, where such calls are tantamount to a declaration of war on me personally. Misu understood. He wasn't offering a romantic relationship. He was offering status, a public connection that would make her not a tool, but part of his armor. Attacking her would be attacking him directly. It's still a deal, she said quietly. The terms have just changed. Everything in this world is a deal, he replied. But some deals are worth it. She nodded slowly. There was essentially no choice. Running away meant abandoning her sister and dooming herself to persecution. Remaining a neutral employee meant becoming a target. Accepting his new terms meant gaining a powerful but dangerous ally. Okay, she said, but my conditions remain. Respect. And a say in my safety. I don't want to be just bait or decoration. Agreed, Han Seok nodded, and something like satisfaction flashed in his eyes. Starting tomorrow, you're moving to the penthouse. It's a matter of security and a signal to everyone. The barrier had been breached. She had crossed the line separating employee from companion. But she entered his world not as a prisoner, but as a party to a new, more dangerous, and equal agreement. Intrigues had already been woven around them, and now they found themselves on the same side of the barricade. The move to the penthouse was quick and unemotional. Mi-soo was given separate rooms, spacious with city views, but more like an expensive hotel. Everything here exuded his authority, but was devoid of soul. According to the rules she had established, their lives remained separate. They met to discuss business and share dinners, which were part of their new image, but each spent the night in their own quarters. It was in this forced intimacy that details began to emerge. She noticed how in the evenings he removed his bossy facade, not completely, but at the edges. How he sometimes lost himself, staring out the window with the empty gaze of a man carrying an unbearable burden. How once, hearing a children's song on television, he froze for a second, and a deep, unfamiliar sadness flickered in his eyes. One night, she was awakened by muffled voices and footsteps in the hall. She went outside and saw him. He was standing by the large window in the hall, his back to her, wearing only a robe. Chang-min stood silently beside him, holding a pistol. Clearly, there was some kind of alarm, a threat. "Everything is under control, sir," Chang-min said quietly. 2 people were detained at the entrance. "Who?" Han-suk asked, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Pak-sa's people. They tried to get in through the delivery service. The target, most likely, was not you, but a guest." He didn't mention her name, but everyone understood. Han-seok nodded slowly. "Sort it out, quietly, and double security around all perimeters." Chang-min nodded and left. Han-suk remained standing by the window. He couldn't see her in the darkness. Mi-soo watched as his shoulders, usually so straight, slumped for a moment. He ran a hand over his face, tired, almost helpless in his vast, empty room. She saw not a boss, but a man cornered by his own life, a man who had just realized that his attachment could be another's death sentence. She didn't say a word, quietly returning to the room, but something shifted within her. The next morning at breakfast, he was collected again, cold, but when she sat down opposite him, he asked without looking at her, "You weren't asleep? Did you hear?" "Yes." "Are you afraid?" "Yes," she answered honestly. "Onki." "But not like before. Before I was afraid of you. Now I'm afraid for you, and for myself. It's worse." He looked up at her. There was no surprise in his eyes, only a deep, heavy understanding. "I promised you safety. It was a lie. It's not safer with you around. More dangerous." "I knew what I was getting into," she said simply. "You didn't force me. You offered a deal. I accepted." At that moment, the line between boss and hostage was completely blurred. A strange brotherhood in arms arose between them, a community of people standing back to back against a common enemy. In his weariness, she saw the price of his power. In her calm courage, he saw not a challenge, but support. They didn't talk about feelings. There were no hugs or confessions. But when later that day, while working on paperwork, she found a discrepancy in Chang-ming's reports and showed it to him, he didn't just thank her. He listened attentively to her side of the story, nodded and said, "Sort this out. Act on my behalf." He trusted her, not as a woman, but as an ally. And this trust, heavy and dangerous, became the first strongest bridge between them. The feelings that were born in this hothouse of fear and intimacy were not passion at first sight. It was respect that grew through the cracks in their armor, and a quiet, unspoken solidarity of the doomed. They weren't in love yet, but they could no longer live without each other. For Chang-min, this connection was no longer just a weakness for the boss. It had become a strategic threat to his own position, his plans, the stability of the entire clan. A woman who was unafraid, thoughtful, and had access to Han-seok's decisions was more dangerous than any armed rival. He began to act more subtly. Instead of direct attacks, he began to manipulate information. He fueled rumors among the clan elders. The boss was losing his grip. His mind had been clouded by a woman. Important decisions now required her approval. He accidentally left financial reports open to view that Mi-soo had altered, highlighting her interference, and the resources wasted because of it. One day, Elder Lee, a man of the old school, came to Han-suk. "Sok-san," he began quietly, "I heard you're trusting the new deal with the Chinese to this girl. It's risky. She has no experience in such matters." Han-suk looked at him coldly. "She understands numbers better than any of our accountants, and she sees the charts we're reviewing. My choice is justified. But trust, it's not just numbers. It's loyalty. Her loyalty was bought by you," Lee insisted. Han-seok stood up, and a dangerous silence fell over the office. "Her loyalty is earned, just like yours, and I won't discuss it." The elder retreated, but the seed of doubt was sown. Chang Min went further. He knew about Misu's previous problem, the debt to the loan shark Kim. It had been carefully purged, but traces always remain. Through his men, he hinted to one of his low-level informants that boss's girlfriend might be connected to Kim's old case, and he should remember the details before Kim's sudden change of career. The information, like toxic dust, began to slowly circulate through the lower echelons of the organization. At the same time, Chang Min convinced one of the young, ambitious lieutenants that Han Seok, under Misu's influence, was abandoning aggressive but profitable operations in favor of legitimate business, thereby losing all bonuses and street respect. The lieutenant, hot-blooded and foolish, began to openly complain. Han Seok felt the tension growing. Reports of discontent, minor sabotage, and information leaks were becoming more frequent. He knew it was the work of one of his own, and suspicion fell on his inner circle, on Chang Min. He summoned him one evening. Elder Lee was here. He expressed concern about Misu. I wonder where he got such details about her involvement in the deals. Chang Min remained calm. The organization is large, sir. People talk, especially when they see changes. What changes? Han Seok asked sharply. The fact that you began to consult with her more than with your old comrades. This worries many. They see her as a threat. It was almost an open confrontation. Han Seok realized the enemy was already within. His own empire was beginning to see Misu as a weak link, a point of pressure. And to protect her, he would soon have to do what he had always avoided, openly choose between the clan and her. And Chang Ming, leaving the office, allowed himself a subtle smile. Everything was going according to plan. Soon, the boss would have to either get rid of the girl to pacify the clan or lose control. Either way, Chang Ming was in a winning position. The trap for both of them was set. The tension grew, like pressure before a thunderstorm. Misu, too, felt the change in the atmosphere. The guards around her thickened, but their glances began to slide past her, their politeness taking on a cold detachment. She was no longer just the boss's guest. For the clan's people, she was becoming a problem. One day, as she was going down to the service garage to go to the university, she was stopped by the same young lieutenant who hadn't hidden his displeasure. His name was Jae-ho. "Kansai," he said, blocking her path to the car. The smile on his face was unpleasant, artificial. "Congratulations! Rarely does anyone rise so quickly in our circles, from the bar counter straight to the penthouse. What quick careers there are!" His tone was downright insulting. Guard Misu stepped forward, but she stopped him with a gesture. She looked calmly at Jae-ho. "My career is built on work, not gossip," she said evenly. "Did you want something? Just curious. The boss is entrusting you with important figures. I hope you won't mix them up. Otherwise, some old business might come up. Unpleasant ones." There was a direct threat in his words. He knew something, or pretended to know. "My work is transparent," she replied, stepping around him. "And if you have any questions about the reports, you can submit them officially through Chongming." Hearing this name, Jae-ho cringed slightly, but the grin did not disappear from his face. That evening, she told Han Seok about it. He listened without interrupting, his face stony. "Jae-ho is a fool, but he reflects the mood," he concluded quietly. "Someone set him on it, and they pointed to you as the target." "Chong Min?" she asked bluntly. He nodded, almost weightlessly. "He's my right-hand man. He knows everything, and he sees you as a threat to his influence. He won't act openly against me, but against you. It's the perfect way to weaken me." He walked over to the safe, pulled out a thin folder, and placed it in front of her. "This is all I have on him. Minor violations, shortages, connections to competitors. Not enough to remove him, but enough to keep him in check. This is your insurance policy now." He entrusted her with a weapon against his most dangerous subordinate. It was an act of unprecedented trust and desperation at once. "Why don't you just eliminate him?" she asked, looking at the folder. "Because he's needed, for now, and because the war within the clan will kill us faster than any enemy outside." That night, they didn't sleep. They sat in the office, studying documents, constructing possible scenarios. The conversation was calm, matter-of-fact. They were like two commanders before a battle. In this joint confrontation with a common threat, the last vestiges of their previous roles, persecutor and prey, dissolved completely. Now they were accomplices, partners in survival in the jungle he had created. But they both understood. Chang Min wouldn't stop. His next move would be more drastic, and he needed only one thing, a clue that would turn the clan's suspicions into fury. And such a clue, as they both began to suspect with horror, could be connected to how exactly Han Seok saved Misu from her debts. If the truth came to light, her status from ally would instantly turn into pawn, and his authority would be destroyed. The trap Chang Min had set was waiting to be triggered. Misu herself found the trigger. Chang Min was cautious, but not all his men were so clever. One of his couriers, a young man, was tasked with accidentally dropping a few words in front of an old acquaintance of the loan shark Kim. But the young man overdid it. He didn't just drop a hint. In a drunken argument in a cheap diner, he boasted, "Our new first lady? We planted her in this boss's hands ourselves. Her old debts. That's our old deal." The rumor spread like a slick of oil across the streets. It reached the ears of one of Misu's security drivers, who, out of habit, still had a soft spot for her. Taking a risk, he relayed the gist of the conversation, omitting names but providing ample detail. Misu didn't make a scene. She went to her office, closed the door, and began rummaging through the numbers, the same ones that dated back to when she first started working there. She searched for any transactions, any movement of funds connected to Kim's name or his company's, and she found it. Not directly, but she found it. A small but regular outflow of funds from one of the shipping company's accounts to a shell company that, as she remembered from an old file, figured in Kim's dealings. The transfer stopped just around the time Han Seok solved her debt problem. It was a chain. Indirect, but irrefutable to anyone who understood the numbers and the context. He hadn't simply helped her. He was connected to the source of her troubles from the very beginning. He, or his people. She waited until evening. When Han Seok returned, she was waiting for him in the hall. She had a printout in her hands. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was quiet and even, like a blade. He took off his coat, looked at her, and understood. "That's it. To the office," he said curtly. He didn't sit at the desk in the office. He stood by the window, looking out into the night. "What did you find?" "Transfers from a shipping company account to a firm connected to Kim. They went on for 2 years. They stopped 3 months ago. Right when you brought me the receipts." She put the paper on the desk. "You knew. You knew about my debts not because you were investigating. You knew because your clan was making money off of it. My problems? That was your business." He turned slowly. There was no denial in his expression. Only heavy, tired acceptance. "Not my business. It was an old scheme from my father's time. Kim was a partner. I inherited it, along with everything else. I didn't give the order to persecute you. But you took advantage of it." Her voice broke for the first time, filled with pain and bitterness. "You found out about my problems and didn't stop them. You allowed the fear to grow, and then you came as a savior. You made me your debtor, knowing that this debt was your own fault." He remained silent. There was nothing to refute. Everything that happened between us, she took a step back, was built on a lie. I wasn't a person to you. I was an asset, a way to assert yourself, a pawn in your game with yourself. "No," he finally blurted out. His voice was hoarse. "At first, yes, but then everything changed." "Changed for you," she cried. "And for me? I lived in your construct, in your lies. Every trust, every conversation. Was it all part of your plan?" She saw his fists clench. A storm raged in his eyes. Fury, shame, despair. "Do you think it was easy for me to hide it? Every day, to see you begin to trust?" He took a sharp step toward her, but she didn't retreat. "I wanted to tell you, but how? How to tell you that your nightmare is my inheritance? You should have told me from the very beginning, before you dragged me into this world. You took away my choice, Han Seok, a real choice. And now I'm here, in this golden cage, and even my feelings, I don't know if they're real." A dead silence fell. A rift had opened between them, deep and painful. Her world, which had only just begun to take on new, complex contours, collapsed. His world, into which he had let her in like a light, was poisoned by old, rotten lies. She shook her head slowly. I can't be here. Not now." She turned and walked out of the office, leaving the door open. Han Seok didn't stop her. He stood there, staring at the printout on the table. His life-saving lie had backfired, and the worst part was, he understood her. Every word she said was true. He'd deceived her, and that deception, like a landmine, had just destroyed the only thing real he had. Chang Min had achieved his goal without even touching them. He'd simply let the truth come to light. Misu didn't bother packing. She took only her passport, phone, and the folder containing the incriminating evidence against Chang Min. She left the penthouse through the service exit, ignoring the surprised looks of the guards. She hadn't been stopped. There had been no order. She disappeared. Not to her sister's home, not to her friends. She knew that would be the first place they would look. She rented a room at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, paying in cash. She disconnected her main phone and pulled out an old, prepaid one. Her mind raced. She needed to find evidence that couldn't be ignored. She needed to understand the full scope of the matter. She was no longer a victim, no longer in love. She was an investigator, building a case against a man she had almost trusted. Meanwhile, all hell broke loose in the penthouse. Han Seok gave the order, find her, quietly. But Chang Min, having received this information, acted differently. He allowed rumors of her escape to leak back to the clan. She fled after learning the truth. She has compromising material. Betrayal. This hurt Han Seok's authority more than any open attack. He looked like a fool, deceived by his own passion. 2 days later, Mi-soo, checking old financial reports over a secure connection, stumbled upon a thread. A large one-time payment from the account of one of Han Seok's companies to the account of a company owned by a man named Park, the very same competitor. The payment had been made a week before Park's men attempted to break into the penthouse. It wasn't an advance payment for supplies. It looked like a payment for a service, as if the attack had been staged. She froze. If this was true, then Changmin hadn't simply set Park on him. He'd paid him. A cold needle pierced her heart. This wasn't just an internal affair. This was outright treason, financing an attack on her own boss. She now had a weapon, but she needed a safe channel. Going to Han Seok meant falling back into his net. Going to the police was suicide. She knew she was alone. The mafia world she had so much wanted to avoid was now all around her. Even in freedom, she was at its mercy. She'd been mistaken in thinking she could simply leave. The truth hadn't set her free. It had only revealed how deeply she'd fallen into the game. Ignoring it would have meant signing a death warrant for herself and her sister. Fighting alone meant losing. There was only one insane option left. On the third day, she turned on her old phone. A message immediately arrived from an unknown number. Brief. Independent Cafe on 5th Street, 6 p.m. Just you? I'll be there alone. There was no signature, but she knew who it was. She arrived first. She chose a table at the back of the room, with her back to the wall. At 6:02 p.m., he walked in. Han Seok, without security, wearing a simple dark coat. He looked exhausted. Seeing her, he slowly walked over and sat down opposite her. They looked at each other silently for several seconds. Two islands separated by an ocean of lies and pain. "You're right," he began quietly, not breaking eye contact. "I lied. I used your misfortune for my own purposes. No amount of justification will undo that." "Why did you come?" she asked. There was no anger or fear in her voice, only a tired wariness. "To tell you two things. First, I will call off the men. The hunt is over. You are free to leave the city. I will provide everything you need. And second," he paused, his jaw tensing. "Second, be careful with Chang Ming. He will not stop. Now that you are outside my protection, you are living proof of my failure to him, and he will want to destroy that proof." He placed a small USB drive on the table. "That's all I have on him. More recent. It contains, among other things, Paku's translation. Might come in handy." He stood up to leave. His figure suddenly seemed broken. Not powerful. "Why?" she couldn't help but ask. "Why are you giving me this?" He turned around halfway to the exit. His eyes held the same tired human pain she'd seen that night by the window. "Because it's the only honest thing I can do for you now. Goodbye, Kang Mi-soo." He left. She remained sitting, clutching the flash drive. His departure, his surrender, was worse than any rage. It meant he was letting her go, that he was admitting it was over. And it was at that moment that she realized with horror that she didn't want this. She didn't want goodbye. Hatred and betrayal were living emotions, and the emptiness that awaited her after his departure was like death. He was her jailer, her deceiver, her war, and he became her only true ally in this hell they shared. She wasn't free. She was trapped by his lies, his dangerous world, and her own tangled feelings for him. Escape was no longer an option. She had to either give in and disappear forever, or turn and fight, but not fight against him anymore, but for what they were, despite everything, beginning to become, or simply for her own life. She took the flash drive and stepped out into the chill evening air. The decision was brewing within her, dark and inevitable. She couldn't leave. She was in too deep. The decision came quickly and coldly. She went not to the train station, but to the university, to the computer science lab where her old friend Tae-ho worked. She gave him the flash drive and Han Seok's phone. "We need to put this number under surveillance and decrypt everything from the flash drive. No questions asked. It's life or death." Tae-ho looked at her face and simply nodded. While he was working, she took action. She withdrew all the cash from her accounts. She sent her sister to live with distant relatives in another city under the pretext of a sudden study trip. She bought a clean phone and 3 SIM cards. She was preparing for war, not flight. Changmin, having received word that Han Seok had met with her and released her, knew the moment was perfect. The boss was broken. The girl was alone. He gave orders to 2 of his trusted men. Take her, quietly, alive. She was the key to Han Seok's final downfall. Under pressure, With the right words, she could publicly expose his manipulations and weakness. They tracked her down through security cameras outside a cafe and found her in a university dorm, where she'd temporarily taken refuge with a friend. When she went out for groceries that evening, a black van pulled up alongside her. Two masked men jumped out and grabbed her. The struggle was brief. They gagged her, threw a bag over her head, and shoved her inside. The van pulled away. Inside, it smelled of tobacco and sweat. One of the kidnappers, a bit of a fool, bragged to the other. Chang Min-sa said to call the boss as soon as we deliver. Tell him to go get his piece. Let's see how he begs. They didn't check her pockets, but in her jacket pocket was a blank phone, turned on, onto which Tae-ho had just installed the tracking software. 5 minutes after the abduction, Tae-ho saw a signal moving on a map along the road to the old port warehouses. He immediately dialed the number she left for him. Han Seok answered on the first ring. This is Tae-ho, Mi-soo's friend. She's been taken. Black van, license plate. Heading toward the old warehouse area. I have a tracker. The voice on the other end of the line held its breath for a second. Transmit the coordinates in real time. Now. It was no longer a person, but pure icy fury. Han Seok didn't gather an army. He took only 2 of his oldest, most loyal warriors, those who had served his father. No plans, no negotiations, just one order. Find, eliminate everyone near her. Bring her out alive. He got into the car himself. He turned off all phones except the one receiving coordinates from Tae-ho. His face in the streetlights was like a stone mask. His entire empire, all his deals, all his principles were left far behind. At that moment, only one thing existed in the world, a dot on the map, moving toward the port. And he had to get to it before something happened to it. He abandoned everything, not because she was his weakness, but because at that moment, she was the only thing that mattered. All his cruelty, all in his power, now had one goal, to save the one he himself had destroyed. This was not a heroic feat. It was a plunge into an abyss, and he plunged into it without hesitation. The car raced through the night city, breaking all the rules. His empire was crumbling. The enemy was triumphant, but Han Seok saw only the road ahead, the road to her. The van stopped at an abandoned warehouse on the very outskirts of the port. Mi-soo was dragged out, the bag removed from her head, and pushed inside. The space was huge, dilapidated, and smelled of damp and rust. Chang Min was waiting for them in the center, under the only working lamp. He smiled when he saw her. Kang-si, good to see you. Sorry for being rude. What do you want, Chang Min? Her voice was hoarse but even. I want justice. The boss has weakened. He puts personal feelings above the clan's affairs. The clan will not forgive this, but if you publicly confirm how he manipulated you, exploited old debts, his authority will collapse, and I will help you and your sister start a new life, far away from here. At that moment, a roar of an engine and the screech of brakes came from outside. The warehouse door swung open with a bang. Han Seok stood in the doorway, illuminated by the headlights of his car. Alone, no visible weapon. Let her go, Changming. His voice sounded low and calm in the silence of the warehouse, like a thunderclap before a storm. Changming laughed, but his eyes darted to his men. There were 6 of them. Seok-san! What an honor! Came for your toy. Too late. She already knows everything, and soon everyone will know. Han Seok walked inside, slowly, step by step. I said, let her go. Your fight is with me. No! Changmin shouted. She is a fight! She is proof of your weakness! He nodded to one of his men. He roughly pushed Mi-soo, forcing her to stand in front of the light. And then something happened that no one expected. Mi-soo didn't scream or freeze. She moved abruptly, not toward the exit, but along the wall, toward a pile of old metal pipes. Her movements were quick and precise. Don't move! One of Chan Ming's men yelled, pointing a gun at her, but her attention wasn't focused on him, but on a fire alarm button, high on the wall, next to an old electrical panel. Chang Min! She shouted so loudly that everyone jumped. You paid Parksa to stage an attack on the penthouse. A 50 million transfer from Hanyol Trading's account. I saw the receipt. It was a lie. She had the payment slip in her files, but not the specific amount. But it was said with such icy certainty that Chang Min was momentarily stunned. His men exchanged glances. Pak's name and the amount were a bolt from the blue. Betraying the boss was one thing. Collaborating with the enemy was quite another. You're lying! Chang Ming croaked, but his voice was unsure. That second of hesitation was enough. Han Seok lunged forward, not toward Mi-soo, but straight toward Chang Min. 2 bodyguards tried to block his way. There were muffled thuds and gunshots. The lights went out. Someone had hit the shield. Chaos erupted in the darkness. Mi-soo ducked. She remembered the layout. In the darkness, She felt for a metal pipe, grabbed it, and listening to the sounds of struggle and screams, crawled along the wall. She saw the silhouette of one of Changmin's men, struggling for the light switch. She slammed the pipe into his legs with all her might. He collapsed with a scream. A shot lit up the room for a moment. She saw Han Seok. He had one man in a headlock and had already knocked the second's weapon loose. But a third was approaching from the side. Without thinking, she threw the pipe at him like a spear. The pipe struck him in the shoulder, distracting him for a second. Han Seok turned and struck. A minute later, it was all over. Light came from two of Han Seok's veteran fighters, who had rushed into the warehouse after them. They neutralized the last of them. Changmin lay on the floor, twisted, his face bloodied. Two of his men were dead. The rest were wounded. Han Seok was breathing heavily, leaning against a column. The sleeve of his jacket was dark with blood. He looked up, searching for her. Misu stood against the wall, still clutching the bloody pipe. Their gazes met in the dim light. There was no horror or panic in her eyes. There was the same cold, clear determination as his. They had survived. Not because he saved her, because they fought together. He nodded slowly, barely perceptibly. She lowered the phone in response. The silence was broken only by Changming's heavy, intermittent groan. They both knew what had just happened. He'd given up everything to save her, and she hadn't been a helpless victim. She'd fought as his soldier. The war had been won, but its price had been terrible. 2 dead men, the betrayal of their right-hand man, the war within the clan now exposed. Their world had collapsed completely. There was nowhere to run. There was only one thing left to do: rebuild it. But now, for both of them, they didn't go to the penthouse. The car took them to a safe, undiscovered apartment on the other side of town, one of Han Seok's many hideouts. The silence inside was deafening after the chaos of the warehouse. The wound on his arm was treated by the faithful doctor who had arrived. Misu watched silently, sitting on the edge of a chair, still in her dirty, torn clothes. She didn't cry or tremble. She waited. When the doctor left, they were alone. Han Seok sat on the couch, his head in his hands. He looked broken, not physically, but mentally. "The clan is in ruins now," he said quietly, not looking at her. "Changming was my right hand. Half the operations depended on him. Those who stood by him will now raise their heads. Those who remain loyal demand blood and a firm hand. I will have to carry out purges, a war on 2 fronts." He looked up at her. There was no longer the same all-consuming certainty in them, only a heavy, tired clarity. "I can't leave this world, Misu, even if I wanted to. Too many debts. Too many people who would eat me up the moment I turned my back." He waited for her tears, accusations. Farewell. She stood up slowly and walked to the window, looking out at the city at night. "I know," she said simply. He looked at her back. "You have to leave. While you still have the chance, I'll give you everything you need. New documents. Money." "No!" Her voice rang out as clear as a bell. She turned around. Her face was pale but calm. "I already tried to leave. So what? They found me 2 days ago. Your world has swallowed me up, Han Seok. I don't want to be your vulnerability, the one that makes you give up everything and suffer losses every time. And I don't want to hear goodbye from you." He froze, not understanding. "Then what?" His voice broke. She took a step toward him. "You said you can't leave this world, but can you change its rules? Not the ones on the street, the ones here, between us." Her eyes held the same cold fire he'd seen at the bar that first evening, a fire of defiance and implacable will. "If we're going to be together, it's going to be as partners, equals. You're not the boss. I'm the companion. I don't want to sit in the penthouse waiting to be attacked again. I want to know every threat. I want to see the reports, know the names, understand the schemes. I want to be your right hand, not your Achilles heel." He looked at her, stunned. This wasn't an emotional confession. It was a strategic ultimatum. She wasn't offering a flight into love, but a military alliance. Not salvation, but reconstruction. "You don't understand what you're getting yourself into," he said quietly. "This is filth, blood, meanness. I'm already in it, up to my ears. And today, in that warehouse, I realized I can survive in this. I can think in this. I can be an asset, not a burden." She stepped up to him and looked him straight in the eye. "The choice is yours. Let me go, and I'll become your eternal threat somewhere out there. Or accept me, on my terms. And we'll rebuild this empire of yours so that we no longer have to choose between it and each other's lives." Silence hung in the room, thick and meaningful. He saw in her gaze not romantic dreaming, but the same steely determination that had driven him in his prime. She wasn't asking him to be different. She was asking him to become stronger. Together, he slowly raised his uninjured hand and touched her cheek. The gesture was not authoritative, but almost hesitant. "This will be hell," he whispered. "We're already in hell," she retorted, not looking away. "Now let's learn to rule it." And at that moment, a spark ignited in his eyes, amid the fatigue and pain. Not hope. He'd forgotten how to hope, but recognition. Recognition that he'd finally found not weakness, but strength equal to his own. Not one that could be won, but one that could only be earned. He nodded, once, firmly. "Okay, partners." He said the word like an oath, like a new unbreakable agreement. "Starting tomorrow, you know everything." The decision had been made, not about love, but about survival. Not about escape, but about conquest. They had chosen darkness over light, but now they would walk into it together, shoulder to shoulder. A new reality dawned in the morning. They didn't return to the penthouse. The apartment became their headquarters. Han-seok's first order of business was to gather all remaining lieutenants and elders. The meeting was scheduled for neutral territory, the conference room of one of his legitimate offices. Before the meeting, he showed Misu everything. The actual ledgers, lists of all assets, clean and dirty, dossiers on key clan members, their weaknesses, debts, connections, money laundering schemes, supply chains, deals with corrupt officials. He didn't embellish or conceal anything. It was a complete map of his dark empire. "Now you see," he said simply, as she closed the last file. Her face was pale, but her hand didn't shake. "I see," she replied. "And I see 5 points where Changmin could be playing a double game, and 3 schemes that are too risky. They'll fail us at the first pressure." He looked at her with silent respect. She wasn't terrified by the scale. She immediately began analyzing it, like an engineer studying the blueprint of a complex machine, searching for weak points. At the meeting, he entered the room first. Misu followed, half a step behind, not like a shadow, but like an advisor. She was dressed in a formal black suit, her hair tied back. There was no hint of weakness or adornment. The faces of the assembled men expressed bewilderment, disbelief, and hidden anger. Elder Lee was the first to speak. "Sok-san, we have gathered to discuss the clan's dire situation. The presence of an outsider is inappropriate." "Kang Misu is not an outsider." Han-seok's voice was quiet, but it made the air in the room tremble. "From now on, she is my official partner and advisor. All decisions concerning finances, legal business, and strategy will go through her. Her word is my word." A murmur arose in the hall. Someone laughed harshly. "Are you suggesting we entrust our affairs to the woman you dragged out of the bar? Is this a joke?" "No," Misu interjected. Her voice, clear and confident, cut through the noise. "This is not a joke. This is necessity. While you were arguing about honor and tradition, Changmin was playing a double game and financing our enemy park. Which of you noticed?" She tossed the printed transfer on the table. It was a fact. "She's right," one of the lieutenants, a scarred man respected for his ruthlessness, said hoarsely. "I heard whispers about Paksa, but it never occurred to me to check the accounts." Misu looked at him. "Now it's time. Starting tomorrow, all major transactions will be subject to double scrutiny. My job is to make our legitimate business so clean and profitable that we can afford to gradually phase out the riskiest schemes. Not out of pity, out of pragmatism. Risk must be justified by profit. Changmin's schemes weren't. They were leading us to ruin." She spoke not as a moralist, but as an accountant, a strategist. She spoke their language, the language of profit and survival. This silenced many. "What about strength? Respect on the street?" Elder Lee asked, but without his previous fury. "Strength isn't in fists, but in control," Han-seok answered for her. "Control over money, over information, over politicians. That's exactly what we'll be strengthening. Under the leadership of Kang Misu." He declared it as a verdict that brooked no argument. The meeting ended. They hadn't received universal approval, but they had planted the seed of a new order. As they left the room, Han-seok silently placed his hand on her shoulder. The gesture spoke louder than words. "We've passed the first test." In the car, he asked, "Do you really believe you can clean up all this?" "No," she answered honestly, looking out the window. "But I believe I can make sure our empire is built on more than just fear and blood, so that it has a steel framework of money and influence, so that the next time someone wants to attack, they'll have to fight not a gang but a corporation." A shadow state. He looked at her profile, at the thin, firm line of her lips. She had rejected him as a man, but she had accepted his world, and now she was going to rebuild it according to her own design. She hadn't asked for his throne. She demanded a place at his side so they could rule together. This was more than love. It was destiny, and he realized that for the first time in his life, he didn't feel the weight of the crown, because now its weight was shared by both. Their alliance began not with an embrace, but with work. They transformed the apartment into a command center. Maps, charts, and graphs appeared on the walls. Misu immersed herself in numbers with the cold obsession of a surgeon dissecting a patient. She sought out ineffective systems, points of loss of funds, weak links in the chain. Han Seok, for his part, operated from the outside. Relying on her analysis, he launched purges, not mass executions, but targeted strategic strikes. Those implicated in Chongmin's treason were quietly eliminated. Those dissatisfied but useful were lured away, offering better terms under strict control. He presented each of his actions not as arbitrary, but as a necessary restoration of order, an order in which she now had a share of power. One evening, while sorting through another folder, Misu found what she was looking for, a money laundering scheme through a network of laundromats. It was brilliant in its simplicity, but too well known among certain circles, and therefore vulnerable. "This scheme needs to be shut down," she said, placing the document in front of him. "Not in a month, but next week. It's like a time bomb. It brings in 15% of the total turnover," he countered, studying the charts, "and the risk is 100%. I've already calculated the alternative." She opened another file, a construction contract for the reconstruction of the port area through a shell company, but with real facilities and documents. The profitability is 2% lower, but the legitimacy is 90% higher. The risk drops dramatically. He looked at the numbers, then at her. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a calm confidence in her own rightness. She wasn't simply pointing out a problem, she was offering a better solution, and that was more valuable than any loyalty. "Okay," he agreed. "We're closing the laundries. Start preparing for construction." He signed the order, granting her not just an advisory vote, but veto power in her area of responsibility. That night, when the work was finished, he didn't go to his room. He stayed in the living room, pouring 2 glasses of water. They were talking, abstaining from alcohol. Clarity of mind was their main weapon. "I've never trusted anyone the way I trust you now," he said quietly, looking into the flames in the fireplace. "Not my father, not my brothers, not Changmin. It's scary." "I'm scared too," she admitted, accepting the glass. "Every morning I wake up and check if I've made a mistake in my calculations, if I'll let you down, if my mistake will be your death. But you do it anyway, because the alternative is to be just your shadow or your grave. And I don't want either." He looked up at her. In the firelight, her face seemed carved from stone, but there was a weariness in the corners of her eyes that they both shared. "When I first saw you, I wanted to break you, to prove my strength," he said, his voice tinged with bitterness. "And now your strength is the only thing keeping me afloat." She didn't answer. She simply reached out and covered his hand with hers. It was the first truly tender gesture between them, devoid of calculation or necessity, simply contact, an acknowledgement of presence. In that touch, their new, unbreakable pact was sealed. Not a business pact, not a lover's vow. It was a union of 2 lonely predators who found their reflection and support in each other. He no longer saw her as a weakness or a trophy. He saw her as the perfect partner for his dark empire, intelligent, ruthless, devoted not to him personally, but to their shared cause of survival and power. And she saw him not only as a monster, but also as the architect of this hell, ready to rebuild it with her. They didn't speak of love. The word was too small, too simple for what had blossomed between them. It was something more, a confession, an acceptance, a union. They forged it not on paper, but in the silence of this room, in a clasp of hands, in a shared glance at the map of their domain. Their dark romance began not with passion, but with a cold resolve to rule together. And there was more truth and strength in that than in any fairy tale. Their first joint strike was aimed not outward but inward. Drawing on the dossier Han Seok had once given her, and her own financial investigations, Misu compiled a list, not just of dissatisfied individuals, but of active saboteurs connected to Chongmin's schemes or having secret agreements with enemies. The list was short, precise, and deadly. Han Seok acted, but no longer alone. Every action was part of a plan, and Misu's role was critical. She played the role of a newbie, an idealist, trying to get the finances in order. This irritated the old guard and caused them to make mistakes. For example, the manager of a network of underground gambling halls, Zhang Min's man, refused to provide her with real reports, sending her fake ones. Instead of complaining to Han Seok, Misu took a different approach. Using a front man, she arranged for a large win at his establishment, which, according to the rules, was supposed to be paid out as a large sum from the turnover. The money was counterfeit, but she documented the payment and leaked the information to the tax authorities, having first ensured that the trail led only to this manager. 3 days later, his premises were searched, and his assets were paralyzed. Han-suk could only regretfully dismiss the compromised manager and transfer the business to a more loyal person. Under Misu's strict financial control, she became his secret weapon. Her outward fragility and accountant's naivety were the perfect disguise. Who would have thought that a girl poring over numbers would set traps? The next problem was elderly. He was too respected to be eliminated directly. But Misu discovered that his son, thanks to his father's patronage, was conducting risky smuggling operations without contributing his due share to the general treasury. She carefully slipped information about this to one of the young lieutenants, hungry for recognition. The lieutenant, eager to curry favor, reported it to Han-suk. The boss summoned Lee for a meeting, where he presented him with irrefutable evidence, not against Lee himself, but against his son. The elder was forced to make a choice: hand his son over to the clan for trial, which would have meant ruin and exile, or voluntarily retire, handing over his spheres of influence and saving his face and the life of his offspring. He chose the latter. Each such operation strengthened their power and purged their ranks. Misu didn't stain her hands with blood. She stained them with ink and numbers, which in their world was sometimes more frightening. She exposed weaknesses, financial strings, and Han-suk pulled them at the right moment. The culmination was the destruction of the remnants of Changmin's network. His loyal men, who remained at large, attempted to sabotage a legitimate logistics center by setting fire to it. But Misu, tracking the strange movements of funds, figured out who they were using to purchase gasoline and trucks. She didn't prevent the attack, she allowed it to happen, evacuating the people and replacing the cargo with empty boxes. And when the arsonists tried to escape, they were ambushed by Han-seok's men, not the police, their own. The trial was swift, treason was proven, and Han-seok's reputation as an invincible strategist who foresees everything soared. That night, after receiving the report on the liquidation of the last cell, they sat in silence. The enemies within had been destroyed not by brute force, but by a combination of strength and cunning. Their alliance had been baptized by fire and proven its effectiveness. "You were brilliant," Han-seok finally said, looking across the table at her. "We were brilliant," she corrected. "Your power created the space. My calculations indicated the goals. Without one, the other would not exist." He nodded. There was no flattery in her words, merely a statement of fact. They were a perfect mechanism, will and reason, power and strategy. A dark duo that proved stronger than any opposition. The danger had passed, but they both knew that in their world, peace was merely a respite between wars. However, now they faced these wars not alone, but shoulder to shoulder, and the world was no longer the same. It was their world, rebuilt and cleansed by their shared hands. The time had come to formalize the new order. Han-seok convened a general meeting of the entire clan, not just lieutenants, but also key mid-level executives. The venue was a luxurious yet austere conference room in one of the recently acquired office buildings. Symbolically, it wasn't an underground bar or a warehouse, but a legitimate, respectable venue. When they entered the hall, everyone was already seated. Han-seok walked first, but a step behind, almost beside him, was Misu. She wore an immaculate dark blue suit, her hair pulled back into a tight bun. She wore no jewelry, except simple stud earrings. Her posture was upright, her gaze calm and appraising. She wasn't trying to appear intimidating. She was focused. Han-seok took his place at the head of the table. He didn't offer her a seat next to him. He gestured to the chair to his right, the right-hand man's seat, the seat that had been empty since Changmin's time. The room froze. She sat down, placed a thin folder in front of her, and clasped her hands on the table. "You all know what happened," Han-seok began, his voice effortlessly filling the silence of the hall. "The betrayal was exposed and punished. The clan stood firm, but it will never be the same again. We have become stronger. We have become smarter." He paused, looking around the assembled group. "Strength without intelligence is brute force, which sooner or later breaks. Intelligence without strength is theory, which burns in the first fire. From now on, this clan will have both." He turned his head to Misu. "Kang Misu is now my first advisor and official partner. She will oversee all financial flows, legal and illegal operations, strategic planning, and interactions with external entities. Her orders in these areas are my orders. Her word is law. Anyone who doesn't understand this can leave. Now." The hall was deathly silent. No one moved. Fear of Han-seok was strong, but even stronger was curiosity and cautious calculation. They had seen the results of the purge. They understood that this woman was more than just a favorite. She was part of the new government. Then Misu took the floor. She opened the folder. Next steps. First, by the end of the quarter, all cash transactions are reduced by 40%. Transition to cashless transactions through controlled companies. The plans are already prepared. She handed out the prepared files. Second, everyone responsible for street collections submits weekly reports on the new form. Failure to comply with the form will automatically freeze funding for your site. Third, we are entering new markets, legal ones, construction, logistics, processing. The first tenders are already in preparation. She spoke clearly, without pauses, as if delivering a well-rehearsed report, but every point was imbued with ironclad logic and a keen understanding of detail. She wasn't asking, she was informing about the new rules of the game. When she finished, one of the lieutenants, a grizzled veteran with a rough face, stood up. All that is clear, but what about respect? What should we call her? How should we address her? Hansok answered before she could open her mouth. You will address her as Samonim, mistress, or Advisor Kang, and you will show her the same respect you show me, because whoever doesn't respect her doesn't respect my authority. And whoever doesn't respect my authority, he didn't finish, but the meaning hung in the air, clearer than any words. It was a public coronation, not pompous, not romantic, dry, businesslike, but all the more weighty for it. He didn't simply introduce her as his woman. He introduced her as his right hand, the architect of their future. After the meeting, they got into the car in silence. Only when the door closed did Misu allow herself to exhale deeply. Her fingers trembled slightly. Well then, Advisor Kang, Hansok said quietly, looking straight ahead. Welcome to the top. It's not the top, she replied just as quietly, clasping her hands to hide her trembling. It's just a new starting point. Now they'll wait for our first mistake. Then we won't make mistakes, he said. And it sounded not like bravado, but like a simple statement of fact. They couldn't afford that. Her status was cemented. She was no longer a secret force, but an official figure in the hierarchy. From that day on, she ceased to be his weakness. She became the shield and sword of his empire. Their union, born of betrayal and blood, was legitimized in the face of their entire dark world. And this was only the first step toward true power, power they would share equally. Their next step wasn't war, but restructuring. Under Misu's leadership, the clan began to change from within. She divided all activities into 3 categories: dirty, semi-legal, and clean. Her plan was simple: reduce the first, control the second, and expand the third. The first to be reformed was the street roof. Instead of crude racketeering, small business owners were offered services, protection from inspections through connections, preferential loans, discounts on supplies. Those who refused weren't beaten, they were squeezed economically. Income remained, but violence retreated into the shadows. Hanseok watched. His empire, like a dangerous beast, was now encased in a shell of legitimate companies and contracts. Its power was bolstered not only by weapons, but also by the business papers from Misu's briefcase. The most difficult part was dealing with drug trafficking, the dirtiest, yet most lucrative business. Misu didn't simply ban it. She organized a leak of information about routes and warehouses to competitors and the police, having first withdrawn her own people. While the war raged, their network switched to electronic smuggling, less risky and almost as profitable. Within 6 months, the clan had assumed the outward appearance of a successful holding company. Construction, logistics, and finance. Cruelty had become a last resort, rarely used. At a closed council, Elder Lee asked, "We're becoming accountants. Is that the essence of our brotherhood?" Hansok looked at him coldly. "The essence of brotherhood is strength and survival. Before, we sat in the sewers. Now we rule from the office. And that's thanks to her." Everyone looked at Misu. She nodded. "We're not businessmen. We're engineers. We're building a system where our word is law, not because of guns, but because we control all the levers. That's real power." They didn't just change their image. They transitioned from brute force to the power of the system, and they built it together. Their happiness wasn't that bright. It didn't live in sunny strolls or loud declarations. It settled in the quiet of their shared office late at night, when the city outside grew silent and only they remained, project maps, and a cup of cold coffee. It existed in the moment when their gazes met over a document, and it was clear without words that they were thinking of the same thing, in the calm confidence that behind them lay not a knife, but a reliable shield. They didn't live together in the traditional sense. They shared a penthouse, but it felt more like a headquarters. Each had their own rooms, their own space. Their intimacy wasn't expressed in passion, though there was that, dark and thrilling, like a plunge into the abyss, but in absolute trust. He could fall asleep in a chair in her presence, knowing she'd review all the reports and wake him only in the event of a real threat. She could say no to a business decision, and he'd argue, but he'd listen. One day, while sorting through a complex merger between two legitimate firms, she spotted a catch that none of his lawyers had noticed. Having resolved the issue, she looked at him and said simply, "Your lawyers are getting lazy. We need to change the team." He nodded, still poring over his papers. "Get on with it." Her word became law in a sphere that had previously been exclusively his, and this didn't restrict him. On the contrary, it liberated him. He could focus on strength, connections, and control over people, knowing that his financial backing and strategy were in safe hands. Their rare moments of peace were devoid of sentimentality. They would sit silently on the enormous sofa, each with their own tablet, and this silence was more profound than any conversation. Sometimes he would approach her, standing by the window, and simply place his hand on her shoulder. She would close her eyes, allowing herself for a moment to feel not the weight of the crown, but the warmth of his palm. This was their love, not an escape from reality, but the only safe place within her. They found happiness not in denying who they were, but in fully embracing it. He, the boss, bearing the weight of decisions. Sha'i, the strategist, framing his will in iron logic. Together, they created not just a union, but a single organism, where each complemented the other. Their love became a quiet, unshakable refuge from the cruel world they themselves had created and now ruled. Despite everything, it was happiness, dark, complex, forever shadowed by the shadow of danger, but it was theirs. And it was worth all the blood they had spilled. They didn't delude themselves into thinking they'd have eternal peace. Their world was an ecosystem of predators, and their pinnacle was always under attack. Happiness didn't abolish their vigilance, it sharpened it. Now each of them had something to lose. The threats changed form. Instead of overt attacks, they became quiet sabotage of legitimate businesses. Instead of bullets, they became anonymous denunciations to the tax authorities or investigations based on tips from competitors. But they were prepared. Their system had an immune response to every challenge. One day, their construction company unexpectedly lost a major tender. Misu, having studied the documents, found traces of interference by a high-ranking official who was considered neutral. "He was bought," she stated, "by our old friends from the West. So we need to make him an offer he can't refuse." Hansok replied coldly. "No," she countered. "We need to ensure he wins the next tender fairly, not out of fear, but out of self-interest." She devised a multi-step scheme. She leaked dirt on his deputy, arranged a lucrative deal for his relative, and simultaneously made it clear that information about his connections with competitors could become known to his superiors. The official changed his mind the very next day. Their strength lay in their flexibility. They could respond with brute force, but they preferred more subtle methods. However, they always remembered that grace is a choice, not a weakness. At night, lying next to each other in the dark, they sometimes talked about the future. "You don't regret it?" he asked once, looking at the ceiling. "That your life has become this way?" She turned to him, her face pale in the moonlight. "My life before you was a struggle for survival. Now it's a struggle for power, and I have an ally. So no, I don't regret it. And if one day this isn't enough, if danger comes for you right here, then we will face it together," she said simply. As always, there was no bravado in her voice. There was a simple, undeniable truth. They were links in a chain. To break one meant weakening the other. They couldn't live without each other, not only because of their feelings, but because they had become parts of the same survival mechanism. Their love was both their greatest strength and their most terrible vulnerability. It gave them a reason to fight and made them a target. They knew it, and they accepted it. Every morning, waking up, they exchanged a quick, assessing glance. "You are here. I am here. So the day can begin." The peace was a temporary truce, not peace. But in this truce, they found their dark, imperfect happiness. They ruled a world where they could kill each other every night, and this only strengthened their bond. It was the paradox on which their entire universe rested. A love that cost blood, and a power that fed on that love, and they wouldn't change a word of it. They stood by the panoramic window of their penthouse, looking out at the city at night, spreading out below like a map of their domain. The car lights were like moving streams of gold and blood. Here, at the top, silence reigned. Hanseok stared into the distance, his face calm and tired in the glass's reflection. Misu stood next to him, her shoulder almost touching his arm. There was no triumph in her gaze, only a deep, focused clarity. She saw more than just lights. She saw patterns, flows, points of tension. He slowly lowered his hand and found hers. Their fingers intertwined, not in a gentle gesture, but in a firm, almost businesslike grip, like two climbers clasping on a narrow ledge. She once turned him down at a bar, unwavering in the face of his drunken arrogance. She rejected him as a man, seeing only danger and manipulation. She fought, she ran, she came back, and now she stood here as his only equal, not hiding in the shadow of his power, but sharing its burden equally. She didn't become his light. She became his darkest, most reliable part, his strategist, his advisor, his queen. They didn't speak. Words would have been superfluous. Everything had already been said through actions, decisions, quiet nights at work, and rare moments of peace in their personal hell. The city below lived its own life, unaware that its fate was being quietly decided in this room at the very top. But they knew. They no longer looked down on this world like conquerors. They viewed it as a complex mechanism that needed constant maintenance. She turned slightly toward him. He met her gaze. There was no question in his eyes, only silent recognition. We are here. We are in power. And we are together. She nodded slightly, also without words. Yes, until the end, their dark, cruel, passionate romance wasn't over. It had simply found its final ideal form. The union of two strong individuals who found in each other not salvation, but a reflection. They ruled their dark empire. And they would continue to rule, as long as their hearts beat in unison, cold, clear, and inexorable.